have very high inflation, and that high inflation is slowing down the economy. Now, to fight the high inflation, the Federal Reserve Bank is working to raise interest rates. Higher interest rates help to cool down inflation, but that also slows down the economy. When you have low interest rates, it creates ease of access to money, because like if you can borrow money for 2%, I mean, you only need a 4 or 5% return on your money to justify making an investment. But if you have to borrow money at 10%, now you need a much higher return on your money to justify that investment. And so we saw the valuations of everything rise. Obviously, we saw home prices skyrocket. The stock market skyrocketed, even though we were going through the worst recession during the pandemic since like the Great Depression. Startup valuations went through the roof. And the reason why these valuations went through the roof is because now every bank, every investment institution is competing against each other with boatloads of cash trying to get into these firms. And so now when you're competing against a startup, you might say, okay, if you make $100,000 a year, I'll value you at $1 million. I'll give you $100,000 for 10% of your company. But then if you go to bank number 2 and say, what will you do? And if bank number 2 says, I'll value you at 800,000, you're going to say, well, I'm already valued at $1 million. Can you do any better? Now bank number 2 might say, okay, I value you at 1.5 million based off your $100,000 of income. Then you go to bank number 3 and say, hey, can you do better? And they might say, I'll value you based off your $100,000 of income at $4 million. Now you're like, okay, we're talking. And now you start to shop like this, and valuations just started to skyrocket. This is a tough concept to understand, but a lot of companies actually do this, especially in the early stages, where they spend $1 to make 50 cents because they're just trying to grow their market share. They're trying to grow the number of users they had. Like Uber used to lose money on every single ride. Why? Because they wanted to eliminate the competition and get the market share. Rising interest rates is going to make money more expensive, and that's where you start to differentiate the dumb money and the smart money. And as we raise interest rates to cool down inflation, it is going to cause economic pain. The most important thing here is you need to get financially educated, and you're going to hear me say that a lot. The reason why is because anytime we go through this type of shakeup or change in the economy, until it slaps you in the face, everybody will keep saying, oh, it's contained, you don't got to worry about it, everything is fine. And I can give you countless examples. In 2020, we saw it happen. In 2008, in 2008, first there's no housing bubble. Oh, there's a housing bubble, but it's contained to housing. And then, oh crap, the whole financial system's on the verge of collapsing. The reality is we have our president saying there's no chance of any economic slowdown, not just this year, but in the coming years. Our Treasury Secretary has been saying the same thing. The Federal Reserve Bank is saying we're going to see a soft landing. Now, let's just look at the numbers to really understand what's going on, because the first issue is really what I call this idea of debt monetization, which is probably one of the most concerning issues.
Am I correct that debt monetization is printing money?
Yes, it's a basic way to explain it. Over the last couple of years, especially during the pandemic era, we printed with the Federal Reserve Bank around $5 trillion.
Jesus.
So to put that in perspective, about 20% of our every single person had to go to work for a year. Every corporation had to work for a year in order to produce $25 trillion worth of money or wealth. The Federal Reserve Bank was able to print $5 trillion with a push of a few buttons, essentially. So now when you think about that, the question is, why do you and I have to pay taxes if the government and the Fed can just print this money? Well, it's because there's a cost to this money printing. What is that cost? Well, that cost is inflation. We're in a situation right now where the amount of money that has been printed is insane. And we don't even know the exact amount of money. Like, we know the stimulus was something around $5 trillion, but the Federal Reserve Bank also did a lot of unlimited quantitative easing. The definition of money changed during 2020. M1, I'm not going to get into the technicals. Quantitative easing is when the government does some sort of stimulus, when the government spends money in a way to stimulate the economy. So that is stimulus. Quantitative easing would be where the Federal Reserve Bank now is working to stimulate by printing. The government has one source of income, taxes. And so when they spend more money than what they bring in, this money has to come from somewhere. So in 2022, the government brought in about $5 trillion in taxes. They spent about $6.5 trillion. So where does that $1.5 trillion come from? Yeah, so there's a lot more money out there, which then causes inflation. Because now money enters the economic system, people have the ability to spend, while not much is being produced. Now that's the first issue, and this has been going on for a little while. It's been going on since before the pandemic, but it really just amplified during the pandemic. Now, the next issue is the amount of debt out there. So the government national debt is breaking records.
It's like 32
or so
trillion.
trillion dollars.
Jesus.
We have the highest amount of household debt ever and the highest amount of corporate debt ever. So we have more debt than ever before. And now we have high inflation, high amounts of debt. Now, what's the next thing that's happening? The Federal Reserve Bank is working to raise interest rates. Well, what does raising interest rates do? They are trying to reduce demand. This is what they're saying. They want to reduce people's buying ability, because when you have the ability to buy whatever home you want, whatever car you want, whatever vacation you want, people will spend. That then causes the price of things to rise because there's a limited supply of these things. So they want to reduce demand. How do they reduce demand? They reduce affordability. When most of us think of debt, we think of something like a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Our national debt is not a 30-year mortgage. Some of it is 10 years, some of it is 5 years, some of it is 1 year, some of it is 6 months. Our household debt, we have things like credit card debt, which are variable interest rates. So now interest rates are shooting up and they're going to continue to go higher. The Federal Reserve Bank is saying that interest rates are going to have to go higher than what they originally expected. So the Federal Reserve Bank has to raise interest rates to bring inflation down. And the consequence of raising interest rates is a slowing economy, aka less people have jobs. So is their current projection of raising interest rates, which is bringing interest rates to about 5%, is that going to be enough with about 2 million lost jobs? Is that going to be enough to fix the inflation problem? No, it's not going to be. The Federal Reserve Bank has been wrong many, many, many times. And if we just look at the last few years, first they said that this stimulus, quantitative easing, is not going to cause inflation. Then they said, oh, this inflation will be gone by the end of the year. Then they said the inflation is transitory. Then they said the inflation is not transitory. Then they said the inflation will be gone, completely in the next couple of years. Now they're saying that the inflation fight is going to be much more painful and much more difficult than originally expected. So the Federal Reserve Bank, as of today, are saying that 5% is their terminal rate. As of today, it's at around 4.5%. Last year, they said the terminal rate was going to be around 4.6%. Before that, they said it would be even lower than that. So they keep raising how high they expect interest rates to go. They're saying that a 5% interest rate would result in an unemployment rate of an extra 2 million people losing their jobs. Is that going to be enough? Well, based off of the past trends and based off of where inflation has gone, it doesn't look like it's enough. We're living in this world thinking everything is just fine. Everyone keeps saying that there's going to be a soft landing. Everyone keeps saying that we might not even see a recession. Everyone keeps saying that there's nothing to worry about. Yet, if you look at the numbers, we have still extremely high inflation, the highest debt levels ever. We have interest rates that are rising, which means your corporate debt costs are rising. Even if you don't increase your debt levels, the cost payment is rising because interest rates are rising. We have our national debt cost, which is rising. Even if the government didn't spend more money, their payments would still be rising. Household debt costs are rising. Why? Because our credit card debt is at the highest level ever. If you dig a little bit deeper, you start to see where the real issues start to arise. Because now if you look at, for example, if we just look at the government, in 2022, our interest payments on the debt outpaced our total veterans spending, Veterans Affairs spending, and transportation spending combined. That's 2022. In 2021, we spent more than $100 billion less in interest payments than in 2022. And the prediction is that by around 2025, our interest payment spending, just on the interest on the debt, is going to exceed our entire military budget here in the United States. Now you have to ask, okay, is that a problem? Well, if the government can continue generating enough tax dollars, then maybe it's not a problem. How does the government generate tax dollars? You have to go to work to get paid. Your company has to make a profit. People have to make money in their investments. Let's start tying this together now. If the economy is slowing, people are losing their jobs, corporations are making smaller profits, less income. Less income means less taxable income. Less taxable income means less tax dollars. So if the government is generating less tax dollars because the economy is slowing, people are losing their jobs, how are they going to afford a ballooning interest payment? Our interest payments are growing so quickly, not because now the government is spending like they were in 2020 and 2021, but because the cost of servicing the debt is growing really faster than ever. And on top of that, the Federal Reserve Bank is saying that they're going to have to increase interest rates more aggressively and potentially even longer than what they originally expected. So now you look at that from the government side, You're saying, oh, there's some issues on the government side, but they should be able to figure it out. We're the world's reserve currency. Okay, let's go to the corporate side. Corporations are going to face one of their biggest tests because of this ballooning debt bubble. And the reason why is because in 2020, 2021, and even in 2022, corporations were making their biggest profits ever. The economy was booming, partially because of all the money that was now just entered our economy. There's a lot of fresh money in the economy. Corporations are making money hand over fist, meaning they're making big profits, meaning they would have big piles of cash. Yet you're seeing layoffs accelerate. Why are corporations having to do layoffs when they're making the biggest profits ever just, a year or two ago? Well, it's what does a corporation do with their cash? There's three things that a company can do with their cash. They can save it for an emergency. They can reinvest it back into the company, hire more employees, open more plants, open more stores, or they can give this money away to their owners. And what's interesting is our economic system makes it so that saving money as a corporation is the least attractive thing to do. Now you might say, what do you mean? If you made, let's just say $100 million of profit, and you kept it because you said, I want to keep this $100 million for a rainy day as a corporation. But the first thing you have to do is pay taxes on that money.